All right, today we're tracing the epic story of a continent. Seriously, it's a journey that starts tens of thousands of years before the pyramids were even a blueprint and ends in one of the most multicultural nations on Earth. So let's dive right into the incredible history of Australia. So how are we going to tackle this massive story? Well, we've broken it down into 5 key parts. We'll start with the very first peoples, then jump to when European explorers showed up. Then we'll unpack the wild story of Britain's penal colony, see how a new society was built from that, and finally, look at how modern Australia was forged.
Okay, first things first, we have to rewind the clock way, way back. Long before any ship from Europe ever dotted the horizon, this continent was home to some of the most enduring and oldest living cultures in all of human history. And look at this. What you're seeing here, this isn't just some old drawing on a rock. It's part of a living, breathing tradition. The art, the music, the spirituality of Aboriginal Australians, it's one of the longest surviving traditions in the entire world. It's a direct link to a past so deep, it's almost hard to comprehend.
65,000 years. Just let that number sink in for a second. The very first ancestors of Aboriginal Australians got here up to 65,000 years ago. They traveled from Southeast Asia, crossing land bridges and making short sea journeys when the world was in the grip of the last ice age. And this timeline, wow, it really shows just how incredibly adaptable these early peoples were. We're talking about millennia of dramatic climate change. They developed fire stick farming to literally shape the landscape. They performed complex rituals like the world's oldest known cremation, and they adapted as the oceans rose and turned Tasmania into an island. Incredible stuff. Okay, so now let's fast forward quite a bit. A whole new chapter begins as this ancient continent starts appearing on the maps of a very different world. This is the great age of European exploration.
Yeah, this map really helps you see how it all came together piece by piece. It's like a giant puzzle. For the better part of 2 centuries, European sailors, mostly Dutch, were charting little bits and pieces of the coastline. They called this mysterious land New Holland, slowly but surely filling in the blanks on their maps.
And this wasn't an overnight discovery. It was a really slow, gradual process. It kicks off in 1606 with the first recorded landing by Willem Janszoon. Then, decades later, you have Abel Tasman charting the island that would eventually be named after him. But the real game changer? That comes in 1770 when Lieutenant James Cook meticulously charts the entire eastern coast.
And right there, in his own words, that's the moment everything changes. Cook doesn't just draw a line on a map, he claims it. By declaring it unseen by other Europeans, he claims it all for Great Britain. It's an act that would completely alter the course of this continent's history, forever.
So that one act, that claim, it sets the stage for our next chapter. And honestly, it's a pretty wild one. Britain's strange and desperate decision to set up a colony on the absolute other side of the world. Which brings up a pretty obvious question, right? Why on earth a penal colony? Why would you ship convicts halfway around the globe to a place you barely knew anything about? Well, the answer isn't in Australia. It's in a crisis that was boiling over back in Britain. Well, here's the deal. Britain had a huge problem. They just lost the American colonies, which meant they couldn't dump their convicts there anymore. Their backup plan, these floating prisons called hulks, were disgusting, overcrowded, and overflowing. And building new jails? Way too expensive. Britain was backed into a corner and running out of time. And suddenly, those glowing reports from James Cook about a place called Botany Bay start to look like the perfect, almost desperate solution. So, in January 1788, the first fleet arrives. As it turns out, Botany Bay wasn't great, but a harbor just around the corner was perfect. They named it Sydney Cove. And yeah, the numbers really tell the story here. 11 ships, over 1,000 people? But look closer. The vast majority of them, 778 to be exact, were convicts. This was not a colony of hopeful pioneers. It was, first and foremost, a prison, the beginning of a massive and totally unprecedented social experiment. So, from this one desperate beginning, let's see how this tiny, isolated outpost explodes into a series of sprawling colonies, completely reshaping the continent in the process. I mean, the difference between these 2 images is just staggering, isn't it? On the left, you've got Sydney Cove in 1794, a tiny, fragile little settlement. But then look at the map on the right from 1850. In just over 60 years, that one little foothold has just exploded into a huge network of towns and farms, covering a massive part of the continent. And this explosion across the continent, it wasn't just happening by chance. It was all pretty organized, as Britain started carving up the land into 6 separate colonies. Starting with New South Wales, they created Tasmania, Western Australia, South Australia, Victoria, and finally Queensland, each with its own government. And the engine behind all this expansion? It was convict labor. Just think about this number. Between 1788 and 1868, when they finally stopped, more than 161,000 convicts were shipped to Australia. They were the ones building the roads, the buildings, clearing the land, forging a brand new society. But convicts were only part of the story. The real transformation, the thing that kicked everything into high gear, came down to 2 things: wool and gold. The wool industry created a ton of wealth, and then the gold rushes in the 1850s, they brought a massive flood of free immigrants from all over the world, all looking for their fortune, changing the place forever. And all of that, the gold, the wool, the new settlers, it all leads us right into our final chapter: how this collection of separate British colonies became the single modern nation we see today. The absolute turning point happens right at the dawn of a new century. After years and years of arguments and debates, the 6 colonies finally voted to join together. So on January 1st, 1901, the Commonwealth of Australia was officially born, and the continent became one nation. But if federation created the nation, the next big change completely redefined it. After World War II, Australia opened its doors, launching this enormous immigration program that brought in over 7 million migrants. It was a nation-building project on a scale that's hard to imagine, and it completely reshaped what it meant to be Australian. And you can see the results of that decision right here. By 2021, Australia's population had swelled to over 25.5 million. But here's the incredible part. Nearly a third of them, a full 30%, were born somewhere else. It had become a truly global nation. So, what a journey, right? From an ancient land, home to the world's oldest continuous cultures, to a remote prison, to a colonial outpost, and now a global crossroads. It's an absolutely incredible, complex story, and it leaves us with one big question to think about. From here, what comes next?